Hello, I'm Kamali, taking you through the stories people are talking about and sharing around the world on Newsfeed today. Hi, Mr. Kim. Hi, Mr. Donald. The President and the Supreme Leader could meet in May. They killed tens of thousands in Colombia before laying down their guns. What chances do FARC's former rebels have in this weekend's elections? Denmark cracks down on crime in what it calls ghettos. Are the rules really targeting immigrants? And sub-zero selfies, penguins on fleek on Antarctica. Well, at the top of the news feed, and you'll have seen that President Trump has said he'll meet his North Korean nemesis, Kim Jong-un. Good news, no nuclear war, we hope. Now, they're due to meet in May, so plenty of time to understand how one Korea became two. It's history lesson time.
In 1945, at the end of World War II, the Korean peninsula was divided. The South was backed by the U.S. Its wartime ally, but ideological opponent, the Soviet Union, backed the North. The 38th parallel that divides the two Koreas was drawn by Dean Rusk, a U.S. Army colonel at the time, and later a Secretary of State. Rusk later admitted it was almost arbitrary. Using a National Geographic map, we looked just north of Seoul for a convenient dividing line, but could not find a natural geographical line. We saw instead the 38th parallel and decided to recommend that. The occupying superpowers had no intention of cooperating. The U.S. pushed the UN to endorse elections in the South. The Democratic Republic of Korea formally took power from the U.S. on August 15, 1948. In the North, the Soviet-backed Democratic People's Republic of Korea was declared on September 9th, with Kim Il-sung as prime minister. But the Democratic People's Republic of Korea was anything but democratic. Kim Il-sung ruled with an iron fist. He handed power to his son, Kim Jong-il, who handed it to his son, Kim Jong-un, the current leader in the third generation of a new type of government, hereditary communism. Backing up though, early on in Kim Il-sung's reign, the two Koreas went to war. In 1950, the North, backed by China with Soviet support, invaded the South, quickly taking much of the country. But the UN, led by the US, conducted an allied counterattack that pushed back the North Korean army. China then sent troops to aid the North, and a stalemate was eventually agreed in 1953. But not before more than 1 million people had died on both sides. No peace treaty was ever signed, only an armistice. And the two Koreas are still technically at war. After partition, most of the factories in the region ended up on the northern side of the border. However, under totalitarian rule and a collectivist economy, the North fell into extreme poverty. The South vacillated between democracy, autocratic rule, and military dictatorship before its current democratic system began in 1987. Yet, the South Korean leadership pursued industrialization, and today is known as the economic success story of the 20th century. South Korea's economy is booming, exporting advanced products and technology to the world. Not to mention K-pop, a global musical phenomenon. In contrast, the North is isolated and ruled by a communist dynasty that controls every facet of its people's lives. It looks a lot like George Orwell's 1984. Few North Koreans can travel abroad. Disrespecting leader Kim Jong-un is the ultimate crime. When his father, Kim Jong-il, died, some people were even punished because they did not mourn enough. The internet is almost unavailable, and access is restricted for ordinary people to state-run websites. It's a poor, isolated country that is out of touch with the rest of the world. So why is it always in the news? 2 words: nuclear weapons. North Korea started trying to build nuclear weapons in the 1950s. In 2006, it succeeded, testing its first atomic bomb. Just over a decade later, it not only had nuclear weapons, but missile delivery systems as well. The UN recognizes it's not only a major threat to South Korea, but also to the international community. Last year, after decades of confrontation with the US, relations hit a new low when Trump and Kim bragged about blowing up each other's countries, not to mention everything in between. But in a rare moment of sanity, just as the nuclear rivals were bragging about the size of their nuclear buttons, an opportunity emerged for the two Koreas to engage. Sports. The Winter Olympics in South Korea's Pyeongchang. A Korean hockey team with players from both countries played together. So, can this breakthrough on the sporting field lead to political change? It's unclear. Nobody wants war, but 88% of South Koreans don't want unification. Young people in South Korea fear the financial burden that unification would bring, which is estimated to be $1 trillion of debt. The Olympics are over, and those cheerleaders are back home. But the opening games are having an effect. A high-level delegation from Seoul has been to Pyongyang, and Kim Jong-un says he wants to talk. The US also says it's open to dialogue, and North Korea has agreed to freeze missile tests.
Well, let's have a look at what else has caught our eye online. After those so-called Peace Olympics, the Winter Paralympics are getting going. They start today in Pyeongchang and run until the 18th of March. South Koreans are online talking about the apparent suicide of the actor Jo Minichkey. Now, the TV star has been accused of sexual harassment by at least 8 people. And the unofficial and official presidents of Kenya have met at Harambee House in Nairobi. It's the first time the pair have been seen together since the disputed election of last summer. Uhuru Kenyatta won a re-election in October 2017, which Raila Odinga boycotted. Now, he did inaugurate himself in an unofficial ceremony earlier this year. Well, let us take you to Colombia now, because there have been dramatic developments ahead of this weekend's general election. For the first time, former FARC rebels are standing as candidates after they signed a historic peace agreement. But their foray into politics has angered many, and after violent protests, the FARC have cancelled all campaign events. Now their leader, known as Timochenko, has pulled out of the presidential race. That's later in the year. Not that he was likely to win, he was barely polling at about 1%. Just take a look at this video that was posted on YouTube of his arrival at a rally last month. That looks pretty hostile. Well, let's talk to the journalist Dimitri O'Donnell, who's joining us from Bogota. Dimitri, good to speak to you. So, you followed a FARC candidate earlier in the campaign. What was that like?
It was really interesting, Kamali, to see the reaction she got out on the streets. At some moments were very funny because Valentina was wearing this immaculate white blouse with the FARC emblem of the rose. It's very distinctive. And when people saw her approach, they just ran away. They scattered into bars, into pharmacies, wherever they could actually get cover. Those that did stop to speak to her were very hostile. They said they don't want to vote FARC, they're never going to vote FARC, and they can't forgive FARC. So she was ploughed on regardless, but the mood and the opposition of the public and the hostility she faced was actually quite difficult to see on the streets, and is indicative really of the kind of reaction the FARC are getting around the country, as you saw in that video where Timochenko was attacked at a rally last month.
I mean, hostility is the word I was going to use, Dimitri. Now, there are reports that the turnout in the votes on Sunday is going to be quite low. Why is that?
It's due to apathy, really. Public are not very satisfied with the current political system. They're angry at President Santos, who's stepping down after 8 years in power, but also against the peace deal and the FARC. The FARC really are grabbing all the headlines here because they're polling so badly. This is the first time they're ever going to run in elections, but their candidates have not resonated with the public at event rallies, at public events. The message just isn't getting through. The public can't really accept the transition from the FARC as guerrillas in the jungle fighting a war against the state to credible politicians who are running in the mainstream, and they're not happy that they're going to get 10 guaranteed seats in these elections regardless of the outcome. So that's fueling this voter apathy. But there's also other issues at play here, like corruption, the rise of the right wing coming back into Colombian politics, and it's all very concerning and very polarizing for the country.
And it's worth remembering, of course, that when the referendum was held the first time to bring peace with the FARC, it was rejected by the people of Colombia. So do you think, with this election coming and the apathy you talk about, is the peace deal in any kind of jeopardy? It
could very well be, Kamali, and the reason why is that the right wing in Colombia right now is surging, and if Uribe's party, who is the former president, if they win enough votes in the parliamentary elections on Sunday, and if they clench the presidency in May, they have promised to renegotiate, not only renegotiate, but rip up some of the terms of the peace accord, and that really leaves the FARC very, very vulnerable, because their whole premise has been, we're going to transition from guerrillas, from people fighting in the jungles of Colombia, media, into the mainstream, and they're also very unhappy. The FARC say that they haven't really been treated very fairly by the Colombian state, by the government. A lot of promises have been broken, so it's really all up in the air right now. But certainly the peace accord is in trouble, and if the right wins and surges in the elections, we could see a whole renegotiation on the table later in the year.
All right, we'll wait and see what happens. And Dimitri, we'll be back with you next week after those elections are held. Thank you so much. Now, the United Nations demanded a ceasefire, and the killing went on in eastern Ghouta. Nearly 1,000 dead in 2 weeks in a lot of brutal, unremitting urban warfare on the outskirts of the capital of Syria. Now, here's an idea of what it looks like. This video was posted on YouTube from the group called the White Helmets. Hundreds of thousands of men, women and children live here. Many opposed and continue to oppose the rule of the Assad regime. So this is what happens. Well, our correspondent Sarah Firth has been covering this story for us, and she's currently in neighbouring Lebanon.
So we're reporting on the situation in eastern Ghouta from Lebanon at the moment. Every single day there are reports of more civilians that have been killed in the besieged rebel-held enclave. But I want to show you what's going on here. This is in one of the many Syrian refugee camps, and you meet a lot of the people who've fled Syria in the past, families that live in these camps. So this child's 6 months old and obviously Syrian, but was born in a refugee camp and living here now. See that people here are living basically at the foot of the mountains in Lebanon. They've got pretty basic tents. You've seen this story so many times told, but it's still going on, and the needs of the refugees here in Lebanon and the needs of the people who are still trapped in besieged areas like eastern Ghouta are huge.
All right, let me take you around the world now with some other news you need to know this Friday. Well, the toy maker Mattel has made a Frida Kahlo Barbie for International Women's Day, but have been told off by the Kahlo family. They say Mattel was not authorized to use the artist's likeness, but the manufacturers say they got permission from the Frida Kahlo Corporation. Mattel also made a Katherine Johnson and Amelia Earhart doll as part of their Inspiring Women series of toys. And speaking of Amelia Earhart, scientists say they may have finally found her remains. The first woman to fly across the Atlantic and the general trailblazing icon, she vanished in 1937 somewhere in the Pacific. Now, remains were found on the island of Nikamuru in 1914. It's taken science all this time to say, yes, they are hers. Now, McDonald's thought they were doing something for Women's Day by turning some of their golden arches upside down, as you can see, but the backlash online was swift, with many pointing out that rather than a hollow stunt, the mega multinational could start paying its employees a living wage. And China's going to open a giant national park to help conserve the giant panda. It'll open in southwest Sichuan province and will be 2 million hectares big. There are currently around 1,800 of the bamboo-munching big bears in the wild. Now, human rights groups say they're shocked by Denmark's plans to double the penalties for crimes committed in what the government of Copenhagen call ghettos. Now, it's identified 22 deprived neighbourhoods. More than half of the people who live in them are non-Western immigrants from like Somalia or Lebanon. Now, the government says it wants to eliminate the ghettos altogether by 2030. Tarmina's got more.
When you think of ghettos, you probably think of Gaza, Soweto, favelas. But have you heard about Denmark's 22 ghettos? Here's why you need to know about it. The Danish government is planning to double the punishment for people who commit crimes like graffiti or theft in these ghetto areas. The aim is to eliminate ghettos by 2030. So how is the government defining ghetto? Over 50% are non-Western immigrants. More than 2% have criminal convictions. More than 50% have only a basic education, and unemployment is more than 40%. This is actually pretty similar to how ghettos started in Europe and the US. In Europe, it was areas with lots of Jewish people, and in the US, it was areas with non-white residents. In Denmark's case, the debate about ghettoisation and immigrants started in the early 90s, when the mayor of a town said she wanted to stop renting out apartments from public houses to immigrants. Structural barriers like unemployment, low income, and the lack of a social network lead to ghettoisation. So people end up living pretty much where they can afford to live. So is Denmark guilty of targeting immigrants? Around 10% of the country's population are actually immigrants. In 2015, the Danish parliament passed a controversial law to seize cash and valuables from asylum seekers arriving in Denmark and delay them being reunited with their families. The following year, a Danish MP told an 18-year-old high school student he's not really Danish.
Jeg kender ham jo ikke, så det kan jeg jo dårligt svare på. Man kan bare ikke konstatere. Man kan ikke sige, at fordi man henter hele verden til Danmark, og de så får nogle børn i Danmark, så bliver de børn danskere. Det er simpelthen en forfladelse af debatten.
So should immigrants be punished for living in an area that society's forced them to live?
Now, human rights campaigners in Denmark say that everyone should be subject to the same law and the same penalties, not just a few. Well, if you're watching us on Facebook Live or on Periscope, do tell us what you think. Now, earlier in the week, we talked about penguin poop. Yes, I did get to say it again, and today we bring you this. These emperor penguins in Antarctica clearly felt their Instagrams didn't have enough up-beak shots, so made the most of the camera left by the Australian explorer Eddie Gault. #HappyFeetSquad. And a TRT World team is heading to Antarctica this weekend. Maybe they'll see some penguins. We'll hear from them on Monday's show. Well, that's all from the entire Newsfeed team. Thank you for watching. Reach us on Twitter. I'm at Kamali Melbourne. You can find us 24/7 on Facebook and on YouTube. Make sure you subscribe and follow and add. I'll see you on Monday.